The comics community is like super precious. I recently moved somewhere that was very remote, and I haven't really found many other comics creators here in physically and geographically. But what is amazing is the internet, and again, I think the pandemic is changing things, and it's brought a lot of stuff online that wasn't before. My personal comics community has exploded since the pandemic, actually, which wasn't what I expected, but I'm very grateful for. Professionally, I find that network really important. I'll be creating comics no matter what, even if I'm on my own and no one sees them. But it's having people that you can bounce ideas off, that you can share things with, that you can see their work and be inspired by, I think is really critical, let alone the fact that it's fun. It really helps inspire you, keep you going. Sometimes, if you're going through a particular bump in a project, it can help just shift the gear and things. So that connection and collaboration with other people is, I think, really important.
I think for me, I believe in networking and, just, sharing ideas and people either giving you feedback, both constructive feedback. And I think when you speak to people more and see what they're working on, or the sort of inspiration from their stories and why I create some of their stories, I think keeps you creative and keeps your mind open. And I think having that relationship with everyone in the industry is important, because I think if you're nice, people may pass on your project to somebody else, and I think you have to give that energy to get it back. I love networking. When Bits of War came out, I sent it out to Mark Miller the first time, one of Scotland's best comic creators. I didn't know it was gonna reach him, but like months later, he got it and tweeted it, and I got 100 sales in one go. I never met Mark Miller. I just seen all his movies and I loved his comics. He partly inspired me to create comic books. So I feel like, having that relationship, the sky's the limit. I believe also in putting the right energy into the universe and being positive and, having that sort of collaboration. You just never know. Opportunities will always open up, and I think it's always good to be nice with each other and support each other and, chat and keep in touch. We all love comic books. That's what it's all about. When we meet at a comic books, we all dressed up. That's what it's all about.
I definitely feel like I now, having done it for a long time, have a lot of good friends who also make comics. I think it's been really valuable to me to have friends who also work in a similar way. I know a lot of people that do webcomics, that do self-published stuff, and also people that work doing illustrated and written RPGs, basically peers that are doing similar stuff to me. I think that made a huge difference to me, and something I think I normally talk to when students and stuff ask about it is I think it's really valuable to have people who are in a similar place to you. I definitely think that sometimes when I've been at conventions in the past, people can be trying to they want to hang out with someone who they think is famous or doing really well or whatever, as opposed to just being I love your work and seeing if the conversation goes somewhere, but only wanting to speak to people that they think is worth networking with, I think is a really kind of a gross way of interacting with people sometimes, right? And I think has been more useful to me to know people who are at the same stage as me, who are doing similar things to me. I also just really like being able to tell people whose work I love how much I love it, whether or not we actually have a personal connection. Again, it's great to hear that from other people, and when something meant a lot to me, I'm it's probably going to be, if I say something nice and short, it's probably going to be a positive thing for the other person to hear. So I feel like I've often tried to make an effort to do that since I was younger, which has sometimes been sometimes it was just a nice thing to do, and other times it's been oh, I'm friends with this person now, which is really nice.
I think I said this recently in a different interview. I did not come out of the womb knowing how to make a comic. I know how to make comics because people taught me how to make comics, and because I was in a peer group. And sort of one of the things that was sort of great about the Dundee scene where I sort of was starting out, there's lots of different interesting creators that I liked and who I was friendly with, who were also making content, and sort of not in a competitive sense, but I think it's just, I think when you're just in an environment when everyone's making stuff, everyone's enthused about what they're making, that it will bounce off and better stuff sort of comes out of an environment like that. When I go to a Comic Con, I'm always the most inspired to make a comic because I get jelly looking at everybody's stuff and I'm I'm gonna make something so good. I have no choice but to look at my table. So I think that sort of stuff inspires me and infuses me. And I think especially also when you get into small press publishing, that is very much a field where stuff happens because people share information and share knowledge. I think probably professional publishing is more like that as well, but I just don't know anybody. I don't know that many people in professional publishing, so I don't really have the same sort of like dynamic of like you can just ask somebody about something. I think as a independent comics creator, I think it's so important to find your people. And even if you only see each other at a Comic-Con once a year, I think it's so important that you have those links and have those conversations and have people who are excited for your next comic and who you're excited about their next comic. Like that's, I think, how you grow. I think it's so important to be in groups, to be in peer groups and to sort of like have people to work with and bounce off. I think that is like that's what my PhD gave me, was time and space with people who were creative, who I could learn and grow from. And then also like a PhD, but like what I actually truly got out of it was being in that creative space for 4 years, however long it took me to do. That's sort of what was important about that, rather than, you know, getting a doctorate or something out of that.
I think so. I'm friends with like Alison Sampson, Rachel Stott, Sarah Kenny, and we go out to the theatre and we go and have dinner. And, you know, and it's amazing that we're all in kind of really different aspects of comics industry, but we can just go and just have a chat and have a dinner and just talk about normal life, but be able to just do that without having to explain what we do for a living. You know, like the amount of times I've had to be like, what are you working on? And, you know, in the comics community, I can go, I'm doing a Black Hammer for Jeff Lemire, and people would be like, that's amazing. No one else gets that. And you're like trying to go, how do I explain that this is huge? When I did the Lakes workshop, I'm always stressed whenever I do a workshop that any artist in comics that tells you that they can just draw anything off the top of their head is bull. Absolutely, it's a complete lie. Everyone uses reference, and to the point as someone who taught drawing, I can tell when something is virtually traced, and that's fine, whatever it takes to get your work out. I've no judgment on that, but don't pretend that you can just draw that stuff. Be honest and say you use reference, and then it's all good, right? And I always use visual reference, particularly for like hands and weird facial angles and stuff like that. This Lakes, I showed a sort of picture of all these images of myself doing silly stuff, and then the next slide was the artwork that they became. And then to have friends that I can go out and sit and have a meal, and we can be talking about what reference you use for what, and, you know, just laughing about it. And I really appreciate that, you know. I think that stuff, the community side of it is so valuable that you have to, you know, if you want to make comics, get involved and meet people, because you rely on it so much.
Very unique and specific to people. It depends on the folks. Sometimes you need to talk to a person about a job, and, you know, if you don't have the feeling that you want to talk to them outside of it, that's fine. I think it's also important that you don't end up doing work for free outside of work hours, if that is what is happening. But also I think like having a sense of community and talking to each other is hugely important, to have people that you feel that sense of camaraderie with, and that you feel safe with, and that you can talk to and come to with sort of, is this right? Does this make sense? Like I sometimes do cheering, so I'll like interview authors, and I've got to speak to people like Kieran Gillen, which was really, really lovely. But I have friends who also do cheering, and whenever I get an asking, if any of it looks like, if I'm a bit confused by it, or if I've never done anything for the organisation that is asking me before, I will ask one of my friends and just be like, have you done stuff for them? How did you find them? What was this? What was the fee that they offered you? I think it's really important to talk about things like that and make sure that you are getting like fair pay for the stuff that you're doing. I guess there's pros and cons. It depends on the relationship. It depends on the individual. It depends on how comfortable you feel. I think if you can make friends, it's really important. But also, like, you know, it's important to have people that you can trust in industry and that you feel safe with in industry. And if, say, like, you don't feel comfortable hanging out with people outside of like your work environment or that, like, that's okay as well, you know?
Yeah, I'd say so. Like, it's like something I want to do. Like, one of the most wonderful things about comics is like, it just really does connect you with like people. And when I started comics versus now, like a lot of people whose work I admire, I'm like now like very good friends with and stuff, which has been such a weird, like, and wonderful transition. I think there's a lot of value talking with your peers just to like, they know what you're going through with comics. Like, you know, we're all kind of working, like, there's a lot of different approaches to comics, but we're kind of, you know, it's on a similar track, and it's just really good, and it's just really nice to be able to talk to someone about what you're doing and kind of like getting feedback from them as well, someone who also works in like their field, and like is also doing something similar to you. Like one of the things I really miss about Comic-Con is like connecting with folks like after the show and just talking about comics or just talking about goofy things that we all enjoy. Yeah, no, that's definitely something I'm really looking forward to. It's like seeing my US friends again. I miss my US Comic-Con pals. I definitely think there's a lot of value. There's a lot to talk about. It's really good as well to talk about like the business side of things and like maybe kind of gauge, because I feel like comics should be like a collaborative thing even outside of like making a comic. It's like, you know, just kind of getting feedback from folks that you trust, and like also knowing about like there's certain things that you don't talk about like on social media that are really good to know about, like your experiences with publishers and stuff and pay rates. And I think that information is very valuable, and it's good to share that stuff with people that you trust in the comics circles and stuff. It's also just as well as just like talking about the process and it's very good. Comic friends, I recommend them.
Every profession needs to have some form of community or union of a sort, because it enables working conditions and pay to rise. So artists, unfortunately, generally are seen as solitary creatures, and in many ways, you know, we kind of go into this profession because we like working on our own. Almost we like to sort of like spend our time so developing and honing whatever it is we're doing. There are times, of course, we are forced into collaboration with others, and other times when we welcome collaboration with others. Collaboration generally will lead to an exchange of ideas and improving one's skills anyway. But in an industry that is with such inequality as ours, and with such, I mean, particularly, you know, any creative industry as well is so prone to newbies being taken advantage of, that I think it's really, really important that we all speak to each other as much as possible. Also, what we do is so rare compared to the general public and what they go into and what they choose to sort of follow. And I think I remember, you know, saying that, you know, there's fewer of us who do this full time than there are brain surgeons. It's really, really important that we all actually share good practice and who actually pays you properly, and are you actually getting paid enough? Is that contract trying to screw you over? Or like, you know, oh, like this event is good, this event is bad, this printer is really good, don't go to that printer. You know, having this sort of like advice, even if it's informal, is very, very useful, and will avoid people making a lot of mistakes, and, you know, and avoid a lot of like tragedy, really, you know, because it's like it's no good to anyone if we end up rewarding people who end up doing bad things, you know. But even outside of a professional setting, I think I've been quite honest about my depression over the past few years, and a lot of people actually found that really reassuring and kind of like useful to know that, you know, they're not alone in feeling a lot of these feelings, and that also even somebody who, like me, who is supposedly successful and so on with everything, will struggle sometimes. It's good to kind of know that there are other people who are like you as well, in the same boat. Like, we do the same work, but, you know, what we do to relax or whatever can sometimes change, and can offer some good suggestions to sort of like, oh, so you did that to relax, maybe I should have a go at doing that too, thing, you know. So yeah, it was good.
So yes, absolutely, and this goes back to, you know, what we were talking about earlier, that communication is always key. And for me in academia, no matter what field you're in, if it's a science field, if it's a STEM subject, if it's arts, if it's language, whatever it is, I think interdisciplinary research is super important. You should always be aware of what's happening in other disciplines that you can borrow from and steal from, and, you know, adapt into your own field, because we all learn from each other about different methods, about different approaches and research subjects. And then we think about how they might interact with things that we already know. So it's really important for me to engage. It's literally the only reason I go to conferences, because of the networking. I mean, I enjoy the papers sometimes too, but it's the networking. It's a chance to have these conversations, to learn from each other. And what are you working on? Oh, that could kind of interact with this, and blah, 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 blah. And that's a really, really important opportunity. So communication, community in general is just so important. So yeah, no, absolutely, really important.